You have been lied to about passive income. Not completely, but enough to cost you years of your life and potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars if you follow the wrong playbook. The internet has built this fantasy where you stack up some investments, maybe grab a rental property or two, and then coast into an early retirement sipping cocktails while your bank account refills itself like magic. It sounds incredible. It also falls apart the moment you stress test it with real numbers. The truth is that living off your investments without a paycheck is absolutely achievable, but the version most people are chasing is either wildly expensive, surprisingly fragile, or just a different kind of job wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Today, I'm going to walk you through the actual mathematics, the hidden traps, and the mental game behind replacing your salary with passive income. Because getting this wrong does not just set you back financially, it can wreck the very freedom you were trying to buy in the first place. Before we get into the numbers, I need you to stay for the back half of this breakdown, because that is where I reveal why people sitting on $2 or $3 million still have anxiety attacks over buying a cup of coffee. That is not a joke. It is a well-documented psychological phenomenon, and understanding it might be more important than any spreadsheet I show you today. All right, so let us define what we are actually talking about. Living off passive income simply means your money works hard enough to pay your bills, so you do not have to trade your time for a paycheck anymore. Generally, there are two engines people use to make this happen. The first is the cash flow approach, where your assets send you money directly. Think dividend checks, rental income, or royalties. The second is the total return approach, where you gradually sell small slices of a growing portfolio to fund your lifestyle. Most people argue endlessly about which one is superior, but the people who actually pull this off almost always blend the two together. Now, let us dig into the math that makes the whole thing tick. If you have spent any time researching early retirement, you have definitely bumped into the 4% rule. This comes from a landmark study by a financial planner named William Bengen, who looked at decades of U.S. market history and concluded that a retiree could withdraw 4% of their portfolio in the first year, increase that amount each year to keep up with inflation, and have an extremely high probability of not running out of money over a 30-year period. The flip side of 4% is 25, which gives us the simplest formula in personal finance. Whatever you spend in a year, multiply it by 25, and that is roughly how much you need invested. Spending $50,000 a year means you need about $1.25 million. Spending $80,000 means you need $2 million. Clean and easy on a napkin. But here is where that napkin starts to catch fire. The 4% rule is not a guarantee. It is a historical probability based primarily on U.S. stock and bond returns. More recent analyses from firms like Morningstar have suggested that given today's market valuations and interest rate environment, a truly safe withdrawal rate might be closer to 3.3 or 3.7%. That sounds like a minor adjustment until you actually do the math. If you need $50,000 a year and the safe rate turns out to be 3.5% instead of 4, you do not need $1.25 million. You need closer to $1.43 million. That is an extra $180,000 you have to accumulate just to maintain the exact same lifestyle. A tiny shift in the withdrawal rate creates a massive shift in how long you have to keep working. And there is another silent killer baked into this equation: inflation. People love to say they need $1 million to retire, but $1 million today does not buy what $1 million bought a decade ago, and it certainly will not buy what you need 2 decades from now. If inflation averages just 3% annually, that $50,000 lifestyle costs roughly $90,000 in 20 years. If your income streams are locked in at a fixed rate, like certain bonds or annuities that do not adjust for inflation, you are effectively taking a pay cut every single year without even realizing it. This is precisely why growth assets like stocks matter so much. They have historically outpaced inflation, acting as a built-in raise. Rely purely on fixed payments, and you might feel comfortable in year 1, but find yourself struggling by year 15. So what is the smart move? Build in a margin of safety. Do not plan around best-case scenarios. Plan around mediocre ones. Target a withdrawal rate somewhere between 3.5 and 4%, but give yourself permission to pull back to 3% during rough markets and stretch to 4% during strong ones. That flexibility alone dramatically increases your odds of success. The ability to adjust is actually more powerful than having a bigger portfolio. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, forget selling stocks. I want real cash flow. I want rent checks and dividend deposits hitting my account so I never have to touch my principal. That is the golden goose fantasy, and I completely understand the appeal. But the cash flow model has a trap door that catches almost everyone who walks through it, and it starts with confusing revenue with profit. Here's what I mean. Someone buys a rental property that collects $2,000 a month in rent and immediately tells everyone they have $24,000 a year in passive income. Except they do not. That is gross revenue, not net income. Once you subtract property taxes, insurance premiums, maintenance costs, vacancy periods where no one is paying rent, management fees if you hire someone, and major capital expenses like replacing a roof or a furnace every couple of decades, your actual take-home might be closer to $600 or $700 a month. And that is before the tax man takes his cut. To fully replace a $50,000 salary with net rental income, you might need 8 to 12 properties owned free and clear. At that point, you are not a passive investor lounging around. You are running a small business. The deeper issue is that we consistently undervalue our own time. Managing rental properties, screening tenants, coordinating repairs, or spending hours researching which dividend stocks are not yield traps, all of that is work. It might be more enjoyable than sitting in a cubicle, but your calendar does not care about the distinction. The IRS might label it passive income, but your Sunday evening spent unclogging a tenant's drain says otherwise. I have talked to dozens of landlords who hit their financial independence number and then realized they had not escaped the grind. They had just swapped one boss for a roster of tenants with midnight emergencies. The real solution is not to avoid cash flow assets entirely. It is to use them strategically as a stabilizer rather than the entire foundation. The most resilient early retirees I have studied use a hybrid approach. They hold a core portfolio of low-cost index funds for long-term growth and capital appreciation, and then they layer in enough cash flow from rentals or dividends to cover their non-negotiable basics like food, utilities, and housing. That way, if the stock market takes a nosedive, they know they can keep the lights on and put food on the table without panic selling shares at the worst possible time. Now, we have been focused on the income side, but there is a variable in this equation that is honestly 10 times more impactful than chasing an extra percentage point of return. It is your spending. Every single dollar you spend per year requires $25 of invested capital to sustain it indefinitely under the 4% rule. That means your $300 a month car payment is not just $300. It represents $90,000 of portfolio value you need to accumulate and preserve forever just to keep making that one payment. When you start viewing every expense through this multiplier lens, the true cost of lifestyle inflation becomes staggering. A useful way to track your progress without obsessing over a giant target number is what I call the passive income coverage ratio. Take your total passive income and divide it by your total annual expenses. If you spend $50,000 and earn $12,000 passively, you are at 24%. You are about a quarter of the way to freedom. What is fascinating is that the first chunk of progress delivers outsized psychological benefits. Once your passive income covers just your rent or mortgage, which is usually around 30% of most people's expenses, your entire relationship with work changes. You could take a lower paying job you actually enjoy. You could take risks you never would have considered. You do not need to hit 100% to start feeling the effects. But here's the trap within the trap: lifestyle creep. I watch people hit 500,000 in net worth, which was originally their target, and then immediately move the goalpost to 1 million. They hit 1 million and suddenly need 2 million because now they want a nicer car and first-class flights. If your spending rises at the same pace as your passive income, you are on a treadmill that never stops. The people who actually achieve freedom are the ones who decide what enough looks like and then defend that number against every temptation the world throws at them. The protocol is simple. Focus on the gap between what you earn and what you spend. Your savings rate is the single most powerful lever in this entire equation. Save 10% and it takes decades. Save 50% and you can compress the timeline to 10 or 15 years. Every dollar you do not spend does double duty. It is one more dollar growing in your portfolio and one less dollar your portfolio ever needs to produce. Now we need to address the threat that can destroy even a flawless plan. It is called sequence of returns risk. And if you have never heard of it, pay close attention because this is the monster hiding under the bed. The concept is straightforward but devastating. The order in which your investment returns arrive matters just as much as the long-term average. Imagine you retire with $1 million, expecting a historical average of 7% annual growth. But in your first year, the market drops 20%. Your portfolio falls to $800,000. You still need to withdraw your living expenses, so you pull out $50,000. Now you are down to $750,000. Year 2 brings another 10% decline and another withdrawal. Within 24 months, you have lost nearly a third of your retirement fund. Even if the market roars back after that, you have far less capital to participate in the recovery. You were forced to sell shares at the worst prices just to pay your bills, and that permanently crippled your portfolio's ability to compound. The psychological dimension makes it even worse. Watching your life savings evaporate right after you left your job triggers a primal panic response. Every instinct screams at you to sell everything and hide in cash. But that is the single worst move you can make because it locks in the losses permanently. Riding out a market crash is difficult enough when you have a steady paycheck. When your portfolio is your only lifeline, it takes an almost superhuman level of emotional discipline. The defense strategy is called a cash buffer, or sometimes a bond tent. The idea is to set aside 1 to 3 years of living expenses in cash or very short-term bonds before you retire. If the market crashes in your early retirement years, you do not sell a single share. You spend down that cash reserve and give your stocks time to recover. History shows that markets typically bounce back within a couple of years, so your buffer just needs to buy you that window. Once recovery happens, you replenish the buffer. Yes, holding that much cash slightly reduces your long-term returns, but it is essentially insurance against the worst-case scenario, and it means you never have to sell investments at a loss just to keep the lights on. All right, we have covered the money, the math, and the risks. But there is one final challenge that almost nobody warns you about until you slam into it face first. It is the reason a surprising number of financially independent people go back to work within 18 months of quitting. And it has absolutely nothing to do with money. It is the identity crisis that hits when you no longer have a reason to set an alarm. There is a critical difference between retiring away from something and retiring towards something. If your only motivation is escaping a job you despise, you are going to hit a wall once the initial relief fades. A 2-week vacation feels like heaven. A permanent vacation becomes an existential crisis surprisingly fast. We get so much of our identity, our social connections, and our sense of purpose from our work that removing it abruptly can leave a void most people are completely unprepared for. I have seen people with more than enough money spiral into anxiety and depression simply because they had no structure and no challenges to engage with. The most fulfilled financially independent people I know did not actually stop working. They stopped doing work they resented and started doing work they chose. Some started small businesses around hobbies they loved. Others volunteered or consulted on their own schedule. The point of passive income was never supposed to be doing nothing. It is about having total control over how you spend your time. This connects to the idea of lean financial independence versus fat financial independence. Lean means your passive income barely covers a stripped-down budget. You can survive, but there is zero margin for error and it feels stressful. Fat means your passive income funds a comfortable lifestyle with plenty of breathing room. Obviously, fat is safer, but it takes significantly longer to reach. The sweet spot for most people is somewhere in between. You reach a baseline where your survival expenses are covered passively, and then you continue doing some form of meaningful work to fund the extras and keep your mind engaged. This flips the power dynamic entirely. You do not need the work to eat, so the work becomes enjoyable again. So to pull all of this together, can you actually live off passive income? Absolutely. But stop searching for one perfect strategy. It is an ecosystem. You build a foundation of diversified, low-cost index funds to capture long-term market growth. You add a layer of semi-passive cash flow from things like rental income or dividends to provide stability during downturns. You maintain a cash buffer to shield yourself from early retirement market crashes. You keep your spending intentional and resist the pull of lifestyle inflation. And maybe most importantly, you keep your skills sharp and your sense of purpose alive. Because the most financially secure people are not the ones with the largest account balances. They are the ones with the most flexibility to adapt to whatever life throws at them. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what it actually takes to replace your paycheck, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. I put a lot of work into making these deep dives genuinely useful, and subscribing is the single best way to make sure you catch the next one. I will see you in the next video.